All right, so when we solve inequalities, we want to get it, it's like just an equation. We want to get x by itself, and we want to get everything else on the other side of the inequality instead of equal sign. The thing is, with inequalities, when we read from left to right, correct? So when we read an inequality, it's best if we always get our variable on the left side so that we can decide whether the x or whatever the variable is greater than, less than, whatever the number is. If you put it backwards, it's not wrong. It's just some people read it wrong with the graphs. So I would recommend for any inequalities, when you start moving variables around to solve them, you want to move the variable to the left side of the inequality sign, okay? Now, if we look at this first one, x is greater than or equal to 3. That is nothing to solve because x is already by itself. But what I want to take a look at is how we graph this. We're going to draw ourselves a number line, okay? It's already solved for me. But we're going to draw ourselves a number line, and whatever my number is in my inequality, whatever it says x is greater than or less than, that's what I'm going to put in the middle of our number line. I don't care that you fill in any other numbers. What does matter is that we shade in the appropriate direction. So if my x values are greater than or equal to 3, would that be to the right or to the left? Think about numbers greater than 3. Would it be to the right or to the left? To the right. And also, when we graph these, we have to decide if we're going to use an open circle at our number or are we going to use a closed circle at our number. Okay, why is it closed? Because we have that little equal to sign. If it's just greater than or less than without that equal to bar under it, then it's going to be an open circle. If it's greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, it's going to be a closed circle. So what I mean by that is I'm going to put a closed circle. I'm going to close in my dot here at 3. And then you told me greater than was to the right, so I'm going to shade my number line to the right. And normally in the past, you may have just left your answers like that. X is greater than or equal to 3. That's an inequality statement and with your graph. But we're going to talk about interval notations. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, is it equal to 3? Yes. So when I do that, okay, because it's greater than 3, 3 is the smaller number that I can be. So when it's equal to, we put like a square parenthesis kind of, okay? It's going to look more like an ordered pair when we're done, except for sometimes we have a square instead of a parenthesis. But we're going to put our 3 here because that's the smallest number. And then it goes forever, ever, ever to the right. So what does it go to? Infinity. Now here's a question. Can you ever equal infinity? No. So we're going to put, when it's not equal to something, you just put it as a parenthesis. Okay, so that's what we call interval notation. The square bracket means it's equal to 3, comma, infinity, because it's going to the right of 3 as far as it can go, which is infinity. And you can never equal positive infinity or negative infinity. Does that make sense? Now I just want to show you the difference. If this had been x is just greater than 3, then with my interval notation, it would be a parenthesis 3 and then comma infinity and another parenthesis. So that's the difference between equal to versus not equal to. Equal to, it's going to be like a square. Not equal to, it's going to be a regular parenthesis. Everybody okay with that? Okay. So take a minute and do both of those. Sketch a graph, which is what we just did on the first one, and then write it in interval notation. Sketch the graph in interval notation. I want to see if you can figure out the lesson. See if you can figure it out if it's less than. Remember, we always start with the smallest number on the left. Think about your number. All your small numbers are on the left. It says x is less than or equal to -5. I'm going to put -5 in the middle. Would it be an open circle? Closed. And less than, which way would I shade? to the left. Okay, so I'm going to put a closed circle, and I'm going to shade to the left. Keep in mind, when we write interval notation, we start from the left and go to the right. What is the furthest number to the left that I can be in this one? Negative infinity, okay, because I'm going as far left as I can go. And then what number do I go up to? Negative 5. Is it a parenthesis or a square one? Square, because it is equal to. We close the circle, so it's going to be a square bracket. So on these, when we have our test next Friday, I think, you'll solve the inequality and you'll write the answer in interval notation. Okay. To the right, the number comes first. All right, then I have x is greater than 7. So again, nothing to solve. It's already solved. I'm going to put 7 in the middle. Is that one an open circle or a closed circle? Open. And which way am I going to shade? To the right. So if it helps you to remember, if it's something greater than, then you're going to put your number, comma, infinity. If it's less than, then it's going to be negative infinity, comma, your number. And in this case, it is greater than, so the first thing I touch is 7. Is it square or parenthesis? Parenthesis, because it's not equal to 7. And then we're going to go as far right as we can, which means we're going to go all the way to infinity, and you can never equal infinity. Is everybody kind of okay with the whole interval notation stuff? Okay. Now we're just going to solve some inequalities. These are just like equations. You want to get the variable on the left side with these so that you don't make a mistake when you're writing your interval notation. But we treat it just like an equation. So my first one says x plus 4 is greater than 9. I want to solve this inequality. If I said x plus 4 is equal to 9, what would I do? Subtract the 4. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to take and subtract our 4 over. Then that leaves me with x is greater than 5. And then we do exactly the same thing. We want to sketch a graph so that we can then write our interval notation. Is it open or closed? Open. And which way am I going, left or right? To the right. And then I need my answer in interval notation. What would that look like? Parentheses 5, yep. Comma, infinity, parentheses. If you haven't already, go ahead and do 5. Think of it as 3x plus 7 equals negative 8. You want to get that x by itself. We're solving 3x plus 7 is greater than or equal to negative 8. Make sure once you solve it, you sketch your graph, and then you write your answer in interval notation. Where do I start? Subtract the 7 over, yep. So that's going to be 3x is greater than or equal to negative 8. Negative 7 is negative 15. And then I need to get that x by itself, so I'm dividing by 3. And so that's going to give me x is greater than or equal to -5. Open or close circle? Left or right? Right. So what would my interval notation look like? Bracket, -5, comma, infinity, then parenthesis. Anybody have any questions? All right, we want to talk about number 6 real quick. Go ahead and write the question. We'll talk about this one. There's one thing when solving inequalities that we do have to remember that is slightly different than equations. If I have -4c is less than 12, I'm not going to solve for c. Divide by what kind of form? A negative. Does anybody remember what happens when we divide by a negative with inequalities? We're going to switch our inequality. It flips around. So when I do this, and it's only when you divide by a negative, so whatever the number is that's next to x that's being multiplied, only if that's negative. If the other one on the other side, like the last one where we had a -15, we're not dividing by a negative number, so we don't flip. So just don't get that confused. We are dividing both sides by a -4. So we are going to have to take, and we're going to switch it from less than to greater than, and it's going to be greater than -3. Okay, so be careful with that. Anytime you divide by a negative with an inequality, you have to flip that inequality to the opposite one. Is my circle going to be open or closed? Left or right? Right. And interval notation? Parenthesis, -3, comma, infinity, parenthesis. No brackets here, no squared ones because it's not equal to -3. Anybody have any questions? All right, go ahead and try 7. We're solving for x, and remember we want to get the x on the left side of the inequality so that we read it as x is either greater than or less than whatever it's greater than or less than. If I have 4 minus 3x is greater than -17, what do I do first to try to get that x by itself? Subtract the 4, yep. So that's going to give me -3x is greater than, what is that, -21? And then we're going to divide both sides by a -3, and because I'm dividing by a negative, when I write my answer, what do I do that inequality? Flip it, and so I get x is less than 7. Negative 21 divided by negative 3 is positive 7. Open or closed? Left or right? And then what would this interval notation look like? Parenthesis or square? Parenthesis. It's not equal to, so therefore it's just a parenthesis. Anybody have any questions? Not very hard, right? Just a couple of things to remember. And the interval notation may or may not be new. It just depends on who you had for Algebra 2. If you had pre-calc, then you probably know interval notation. All right, try these two. These will be our last two, I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We got one more after that. We got to throw a fraction in there. So go ahead and try these two. Remember, treat these just like equations. Do exactly what you do if this were an equation, and you will try to solve it. What do we have to do first? Distribute, yep. So let's start on this number 8. We're going to distribute this 2y. I'm sorry, just the 2 to the y and to the 5. And then we're also going to distribute this 3 to the y and to the 12, or to the 4 to get 12. I know if this were an equation, we would probably subtract the 2y over to the 3y. However, with inequalities, in order to read it correctly, the variable needs to be on the left. Now, if you're comfortable with solving it with the variable on the right and then flipping everything around, that's fine, but I don't want to confuse anybody. So I'm going to make it my mission every time I have an inequality that I'm going to revolve my variables to the left side. So I'm going to start by taking that 3y, and I'm going to subtract it over to the 2y. Okay. I know that's not usually what we would do because that would give us a negative variable. However, we don't want to make a simple mistake by forgetting to switch everything around. And so then I'm going to take and I'm going to subtract my 10 over. So I get a negative y is less than or equal to negative 22. Then what would I have to do? Divide through by negative 1, right? And when I divide by a negative, what do I do with that inequality? Flip it. And so I get y is greater than or equal to 22. Now let me just show you what would happen if you did it the other way. If you minus the 2y over to the 3y, whoops. Again, it's not that it's wrong, it's just you have to be careful in the way that you read your answer. We get 22, but this, do you see how my variable is on the wrong side? When I read it, it doesn't say y is either greater than or less than. It says 22 is less than or equal to y. So if you do it this way, you just have to be comfortable enough to be able to say, okay, well, if it says 22 is less than or equal to y, if I want to switch that so that my variable's first, basically everything switches around. And then I can read it properly. Does that make sense? That's why I said if you just get in the habit of moving all your variables to the left side, then we don't have to worry about making a mistake here. Now when I draw my graph, open or close circle? Closed. Left or right? Okay, and my interval notation would be? Okay, square bracket 22 comma infinity parenthesis. Is everybody okay with that one? All right, same concept here on number 9. First question, do I do 4 minus 3 before I distribute? No, you multiply first always. So that 4 comes down. What kind of 3 am I distributing? A negative. Now I'm going to combine my two terms. 4 minus 6 is going to give me negative 2. Minus 3x is less than 5. Then I'm going to add my 2 over. I get a negative 3x is less than 7. And then when I divide by negative 3, what do I have to remember to do? Flip it. Now, does 3 go into 7? Can I leave it as a fraction? Yep. When I draw my graph, negative 7/3, open or closed? Open, left or right? And then when I write my interval notation, I'm just going to use that fraction. It is a parenthesis because it's not equal to, comma, infinity. Infinities always get parentheses.
Is that the same as negative 3.5?
It would be negative 2.3 repeating if you did 7 divided by 3. Yeah, so if you did it as a decimal, it'd be a negative 2.3 repeating, which would be fine if you don't want to leave it as a fraction. Anybody have any questions? Okay, I got one more. You know, I got to throw a fraction in there. Make it a little bit more difficult, but not terrible. Okay, I've got a few people still writing, so I'm going to wait just a second. Let them catch up. Okay, last one. Write it down. We'll work through this one together. We got y minus 3 over 5, then minus 2 is less than or equal to y over 4. Do we like to deal with fractions? No. So we did this with the regular equations. Now, there are no variables in the denominator to worry about restrictions or anything like that. But what I do need is a number that will get rid of both 5 and 4. So I need a common denominator between 5 and 4. What does that do? 20. So we're going to start by multiplying everything in this equation by 20, or this inequality. Don't forget to multiply that 2. Now, I did have a few issues with this stuff when we were doing the equation, so I want to kind of talk to you about how we do it. So when we first start with that first fraction, 20 times y minus 3 over 5, think about it like this. How many times does 5 divide into 20? 4, right? So the 5 is now gone, which means I don't have a denominator anymore. And I have that 4, but that 4 is going to have to be multiplied by that entire numerator. So we're going to have to do 4 times the entire y minus 3. Okay, 5 goes into 20 4 times. So that 20 cancels, it changes to a 4, the 5 completely cancels. Yeah. Then I need to multiply the 2 times the 20. There is no fraction there. What is 2 times 20? 40. Bring down my inequality. And then I'm going to do the last fraction the same way. How many times does 4, the denominator, divide into 20? Whoops. So that 4 is going to disappear. That 20 is going to turn to a 5, and it needs to get multiplied by that entire numerator. In this case, it's just a y. So we're just going to go 5 times y. Oh, and this one's going to be harder to bring everything to the left, too. Let's go ahead and distribute our 4 if you haven't already. I'm going to combine my like terms. Whoops. Okay, so I guess this one is not as easy to move everything to the left. So your first instinct is to do what with that 4y? Yep, subtract it over to the 5y. We're going to just have to talk about making sure we're good with switching things around. What kind of 52 is that? Negative. And 5y minus 4y is just 1y? But again, the variable must be on the left side in order for me to read that inequality and to draw my graph. So since it's now on the right side, I'm basically just going to flip everything around. Okay, do you notice how my inequality here is open towards my y? When I flip it around, it needs to stay open towards my y. So I'm going to put the y first. I'm flipping around the inequality so that it is open to my y. And then that's a negative 52. Okay, so basically just taking that whole thing and switching the order of it. Does that confuse anybody? Pretty. Just like if you had 2 equals x, you can rearrange that as x equals 2, right? With an equal sign, no. With an inequality, if you're not very careful, you'll make mistakes writing your answer in interval notation. Like if you're okay looking at it like this and coming up with the correct answer, then I'm not going to ask you to switch it, right? It's just the interval notation we want to be careful with. Negative 52, am I open or closed? Closed. And y is greater than that, so we would go to the right. And then for my interval notation, square or parenthesis? Square, and then negative 52, whoops. Negative 52, comma, infinity. And that is how I leave my answer.